Welcome everyone to another episode of Voices for Tibet. I'm your host Karma Tensum with the Tibetan Children's Education Foundation. On this program, we are trying to capture the voices of people who support Tibet, who love Tibet. And I feel that every voice, any voice for Tibet is truly a beautiful voice. I love to hear voices that convey a sense that the Tibetan culture is beautiful, that the Tibetan culture has something to contribute to the world. And through these voices, my best hope is this, that we can inspire other people to support Tibet, to support Tibetan causes. Because sometimes with the Tibetan cause, this is the thing, it's like 60 years since the dramatic escape of His Holiness the Dalai Lama into exile. And because this dramatic things happening in the world all the time, somehow the issues of Tibet get pushed to the background. And so that is why I'm so happy that we have people who still love Tibet, support Tibet, and who will be voices for Tibet, who remind us that although it's been that many years since the Chinese occupation, the problem for the Tibetan people persists. And today I'm so grateful that I have another special guest with us. She is a long-time Tibet supporter, a TCEF sponsor, and I want to thank Anne Jablonski. Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us on this Voices for Tibet program.
Thank you so much, Karma. Thanks for inviting me. It's a delight to talk to you. It's a delight to see you. I think the first time we met, and the first time I really learned the full story of Tibet was from you when you came out to the Featherpipe Ranch and gave a presentation at one of the retreat programs that I attended. So it's a real honor for you to. I feel very honored that you asked me to do this. So thank you.
And I wanted to tell the viewers that aside from being this fabulous TCEF and Tibet supporter, Anne is also president for the board for the Featherpipe Foundation. And for people in the TCEF circle, they know that the late India Supra, the Featherpipe Foundation, they've just been terrific sources of support for Tibet and for TCEF. Talking about TCEF, the Featherpipe Foundation was actually the umbrella organization of our little foundation when we were sort of finding our feet. And so this is the person who I have the privilege of talking to today. And can I just begin by requesting you to sort of introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Thanks, Karma. Where do I start? It's so hard to describe a little bio of myself. I grew up in the Midwest.
Okay.
I moved to the DC area after college, which is where I am now. I'm in Arlington, Virginia.
Okay.
I've spent a life sort of in the rat race, and the Featherpipe Ranch came to me as the antidote to what it was to be, to understand that actually I was in a rat race. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. There's a Franciscan priest who founded the Center for, I think it's called the Center for Something in Contemplation. And he has this book, and it's called Falling Upward. And he talks about how we have inside of one life, we have two lives, sort of the first half and the second half. It's called Falling Upward. And what he says is that lots of people think about the second half of life, as the part about getting old or the part about letting go or getting sick. And he says it's exactly the opposite. And he talks about how the second half can and should be full of spiritual richness for us. So for me, my intersection with the Featherpipe Foundation, my intersection with TCEF is really part of the second half theme. It's definitely been, true for me in a lot of ways. I stand in absolute awe of how consequential the Featherpipe Foundation, the Featherpipe Ranch, that place in Montana,
yes, and
TCEF in terms of how it has affected my life in every good way. Right now, I work for a couple. I'm not retired yet. I spin a lot of different plates in the air in my life. I work for one business that's based up in New York, another business that's based here. And it kind of builds on my previous role when I worked in the government, looking at things like geopolitical risk, business risk, heavy duty issues like that. But in the second half of life, it has become more important, like it has for many people, to not just enrich your 401k, but enrich the lives of others,
Yes.
feeding the soul. So I came to the ranch for the first time, I think it was 2004, 2005. Shortly after yoga became a part of my life, I came out there for, Eric Schiffman's retreat.
Right.
And I think it was when I realized that yoga had been a part of my life forever. I just didn't know what it was called.
Right.
A way of sort of being in the world. So for many years, I started going out to Schiffman's retreat, fell absolutely head over heels with not just the program there, but the place, the people who had incubated and had been a part of the, this history. The place has been around for something like 46 years.
Yes.
I was nervous as could be the first time I came to the ranch. I had never been to a retreat. And, I thought, I'm not going to fit in here either. I had rented a car because I thought, what if it's just too strange out there and I need to leave? And the moment I set foot on that ground, I knew I had to come back there many, many times. Right. And now I spend most of my years thinking about when I can get back out there again.
Right.
So I've been enriched very much by the place itself and the people. And I think when I first learned about TCEF, I was so impressed with the fact that, India Supra, that is, it wasn't just she wanted to run a retreat center, right? Nobody makes money running a retreat center. It really was about doing good in the world. Right. And it wasn't just talk. Right. People really walked their talk. And, anytime there were people that needed help, the Feathered Pipe was always there for them, whether it was providing sort of the umbrella organization to incubate good works like TCEF or the Veterans Yoga Project, right, or just the way we have tried, it has always tried to make sure it's available for the people who need it, because it's such a healing place. Right. So I guess that's it in a nutshell. I work a few jobs. My heart is always in Montana, even though I live in Arlington, Virginia. Right. And that's kind of my story.
Wonderful, Anne. But I wanted to circle back to the Feathered Pipe because I know that is such a special place. I know it's an absolutely beautiful place. We'll have some images of that wonderful place to share. It's beautiful for me because, for a Tibetan, we put up prayer flags and in high places, spiritual places, places which are beautiful and where we feel a connection to the energies and the gods above. For me and my family living here in Helena and in Butte, Montana, the Feathered Pipe has always been the place where we go to put up our prayer flags. It's a really special place. And like you said, the folks around the Feathered Pipe, India Supra, Laughing Water, VJ, Crystal, such an amazing collection of people who have, loved the Tibetan culture, Tibetan people. But Anne, can you, as president for the Feathered Pipe Foundation, can you talk a little bit about some of the, not only the programs, because Feathered Pipe is basically like a, it's probably the #1 yoga retreat center we have, but some of the philosophy around which the Feathered Pipe nurtures ancient cultures like the Tibetan. I remember India had this really, just as she had this special connection to me, a Tibetan person, she had this amazing bondage with Pat Kennedy, a Native American. And so I know that the Feathered Pipe nurtured Tibetan culture, it nurtured the Native American culture. Can you tell me a little bit about that part of the Feathered Pipe's thought and philosophy?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Feathered Pipe, it's interesting. It's Feathered Pipe got started when I was in high school. I didn't know about it then. And before it became the Feathered Pipe, it was something called the Holistic Life Foundation.
Yes.
In the early 1970s, you know this story. Mm-hmm. And it was, I have come to learn, it was really one of the earliest centers of gravity in North America, dedicated to what we, conscious living. what I see is that the roots, just like with a tree, if the roots are planted in the right place, in the right soil, the life that grows from it is very resilient. And so I think that accounts for why we're still around after 46 years. 46 years. From the earliest days of the feathered pipe, it has held a very deep reverence for the land and the people who have been its stewards, long before, thousands and thousands of years ago. Someone I've never met, and a key figure that you mentioned, was the Chippewa Cree elder Pat Kennedy.
Yes.
He passed away. He was a legend. I've heard about Pat Kennedy. I've seen pictures of him. I've heard amazing stories of him. He was very eager to reclaim and, kind of reinvigorate the endangered ceremonies, of the people. And so I think it was something like the mid 1990s through 2005, and 2005 is sort of when I started coming. Thanks to the work of the Feathered Pipe, they held something like 9 ceremonies through these annual peace encampments.
That's right.
Along with the state of Montana, and I think it was the Four Winds Foundation of New York. It was this beautiful coming together of different organizations.
Yes.
To raise the money to sponsor these encampments. They provided the food and the accommodations, and it was ultimately provided a sort of education in culture, in endangered culture, for something like up to 800 tribal members every year. They sent busloads of people to attend this thing, and as India used to say, they did everything they could to ensure that the events were completely free for everybody over the 9 years. And I think it was something like the late 90s, might have been 1997. Pat won a big award from the Institute of Noetic Science for his work of being a healer and a mentor to so many of the tribes in the Northwest. And he was all about teaching people what it was to be whole and to be strong, in support of each other and their families and their communities and all of life on Earth. When I think about the work that you're doing at TCEF, I mean, that's very much, the themes are exactly the same. Pat was also known for warmly welcoming non-natives into the fold.
Yes.
And he said that his elders taught him, although the skin color might be different, he said the blood inside is the same. So anybody who came to him with good intentions and a genuine heart, he was willing to teach.
Right.
And the story of TCEF, is another example of kind of good work that gets incubated, at the Feathered Pipe. We talk a lot about the image of the pebble in the water. You put a pebble in the water, it's a little drop, and all these big ripples appear. And when I think about the work that you do, Karma, and why I really encourage people to support TCEF, is that these rings that go around from the center that got started are rings of compassion, active compassion in action in the world.
Wow.
I mean, the history of TCEF much better than I do.
Right.
If I recall, the seeds got planted, something like in the mid 70s.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right? India was under a state of national emergency that Gandhi had proclaimed, and Vijay Supera somehow finds her way up
Yes.
to this refugee settlement in Clementtown in North India.
True.
And she comes back about a half a dozen years later. I'm kind of collapsing the story.
Yes,
she comes back
right,
about 6 years later,
right.
with her sister, and she meets you. And,
Yep.
I think India shows up at your door, and she invites you to talk to a group that she's bringing to Ladakh.
True.
Anyway, all of these little seeds are being planted in really rich soil.
Yes.
And what has grown from that, whether it's at the school that you spend so much time taking care of and you have incubated and that the Dalai Lama has blessed, or it's the elders that TCEF is taking care of, or the ceremonies that you have hosted for us out at the ranch. It's a place. You've made this whole world a place to grow happiness, and I know that's where the name of the school came from, right? Isn't that what Kitseling means? It's a place to grow happiness. Yeah. Anyway,
Good.
up until the point when I met you and when I met, the folks at Featherpipe, the idea of philanthropic work, helping people,
Uh-huh.
I always knew it was a good idea. But it was always sort of in the abstract, right?
Right. I know exactly.
Especially if you're working, you're going to work every day, and somebody shows up at your door and they need a contribution for a food bank, you give it to them, but you move on. It doesn't really become a part of your heart.
I totally understand that part. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I gave to a lot of, local and national charities, but it was my exposure to the stories,
Right.
the individual stories of hardship and of suffering and of injustice,
Right.
and of the optimism that comes from knowing there were people on the ground doing important work that was changing lives every day.
Right.
Anyway, I'm going on for too long, but
Actually,
Featherpipe has been such an inspiration, and TCEF is just one of these bright stars in the world. And
absolutely.
the world is so dark right now that it's nice to be able to look up and see that light.
Right. And those stories about the encampment, so true, because I had the privilege and to attend one of the native peace encampments. I believe it was at the Blacktail Ranch that India organized. I think it was in the early 2000, maybe 2004. It's probably 2004 or 3 that my wife and myself, we attended it. Pat Kennedy and myself, we knew each other. He was just amazing. The basic philosophy that I got from Pat that I'm holding to my heart right now is to sort of tread the earth gently. That is his philosophy, to be kind to Mother Earth, and then, by default to everyone that is on this planet. So he was a wonderful soul. Truly feel privileged that sometimes, and my life itself, it looks almost like an oxymoron, because I was born a refugee child, brought up under great hardships, fled across the Himalayas when I was just an infant. But at the same time, then somehow I crossed paths with amazing people like India Supra, received an education through His Holiness the Dalai Lama, was able to get a good education. And now as a nonprofit director, I'm able to even recycle a little bit of all the kindnesses that I've received in my life. So I truly feel blessed to be, even like today, I feel blessed to be talking to you, to be asking these questions on Tibet, and just being, someone who's trying to support my people and my culture. But I wanted to circle back to TCF, and you may have answered part of the question. I was going to ask you, as a TCF sponsor, as someone who has been supporting Grandma Tsering Dwalkar over all these years, why do you think the Tibetan elders that are now living in exile, I call them His Holiness the Dalai Lama's generation, because these are the elders that came into exile around the same time that he did. Why do you think these people are especially worthy of our love and support?
Because they are the one. That's a great question, and I guess the short answer, there's two parts to it. One is I just have such a soft spot for the elders. I always have. Right. Part of it is this is the generation that created the wisdom that we have today. And if it is not honored or embraced, it does not speak well of us, and it does not bode well for the future. Right. We are moving through extraordinarily, I don't need to tell you, dark and challenging times in the world these days. And when I look back on the hardships that the people of that generation went through, the trauma, from 1950 onward, the loss of autonomy, the efforts to wipe out culture, the violence, to have survived to this day and to have seen and lived through what they lived through for that period of time took an extraordinary amount of courage. And also to be able to, raise a family in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. I think it's our responsibility and it's our joy to be able to honor what they have been through, to thank them for getting us to the place that we are today, and to recognize that they are living in circumstances completely not of their own making.
Absolutely. Right.
And if I were in that situation, I'd certainly want somebody reaching out,
Yes.
for the price of a cup of coffee. If you can, help keep me healthy, please, I want to live in a world where that happens.
Right.
And I also want to live in a world that has true respect for our ancestors and the extraordinarily beautiful Tibetan culture,
Yes.
which embraces compassion as one of its highest goods.
Yes.
And that has been a theme, I think, that's underrated in the world. That people can talk about being compassionate, but putting it into action
Yes.
isn't just, a matter of donating, to an organization and hoping for the best. But the sponsorship, to me, it's also a very personal thing. Those pictures, I have a photograph of her, and I think she has a photograph of us.
Yes.
And in some of the messages that you've shared, she has offered prayers.
Always.
And there is nothing more powerful to me than that, than to be able to recognize that a prayer that I send, I hope lands on her and makes her day better. And the same goes. And it's much different than contributing, I guess, in other places. Not that there aren't plenty of places that need, help and support. Yes. There's an essay. I think it came out like 20 years ago. There was this woman, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I'm probably pronouncing her name wrong, and I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called "We Were Made for These Times." Mm-hmm. And it's this beautiful essay. And one of the things she talks about, and this is related to the sponsorship issue, she talks about how we all feel a sort of righteous rage in these times, that visionary people can look at how much is wrong and untended to in the world. And the temptation is to fall into despair, right? And to give up and to throw up your hands and say, and just protect myself, make sure that I'm safe, and, hope for the best. And she says, no, our job is not to fall for that. And she says that, your job isn't to fix the whole world all at once. And I think that's where people can get overwhelmed, but to reach out and mend that part of the world that's within your reach.
Beautiful.
And that's, any one act that one soul can offer to help another suffering soul is how we get through this, is how we do this. And she says that it's not given to us to know what particular act is going to cause the critical mass to tip toward, an enduring good. And that's not our job to know that. Our job is to reach out and to help. Right. So, when it comes to being a TCEF sponsor, when I get the updates from you on how she's doing, the world that has been so dark just suddenly seems light again. There's so much suffering in the world, and it's this spark of light, so one little thing that one person can do can make a difference. And I feel like I get so much more in return from this, certainly than she does. I only know a little bit about her life and her story. We live 6,000 miles apart, but she's in my heart every day. Her picture is up on my little practice altar every day. And that's been an extraordinary gift, in particular over the last year, where so many of us have felt, isolated and alone and cut off from the world. And, this is a definite heart connection, a soul connection across a whole lot of miles.
Right. And I want to thank you, just as I thank every TCF sponsor who touches the life of a Tibetan elder. I know from my own experience, my parents were the age of Grandma Tsering Dolkar that you sponsor. I know firsthand how difficult life has been for them. And so anyone who touches their lives brings a little bit of cheer. I'm always so grateful. Then from TCF, I wanted to sort of expand the canvas of our conversation and thought to a little bit bigger canvas and talk about Tibet as a whole, whether it's Tibet on a political scene or cultural scene.
Mhm.
And on this Voices for Tibet, I'm always trying to hear voices of people, support Tibet, support Tibetan culture. And in our conversation, just because you have been so innately kind, you have already alluded to several aspects, but I wanted to get some kind of like a plug or pitch for the Tibetan people, for the Tibetan culture that I know is worth your time and your effort and all your good heart to this point of time.
I think the simplest way to put it, and it's not a lot of words, is when I think about Tibetan culture and the snippets of it that I've seen through knowing you, through being a TCEF sponsor, and that extraordinary event that you organized with the mandala, the sand mandala
Oh yeah, the sand
master who
mandala,
came
yes.
out and worked for a week. And I sat for hours watching him work, is that it's a culture that values so much that has gotten lost in our world and that is so necessary. And understanding, it seems to me Tibetan culture has just a deep understanding of our shared humanity.
Right.
And that is that's what's so sorely missing in these times. And I think if people spend even a little bit of time listening to some of the great Tibetan teachers and the cultures, it will offer a food for their soul and offer a way of considering being in the world that is easy, in that it really is just about loving. I mean, I don't want to sound hokey or cheesy, but it's an easy way to love the world.
Yes.
And to look at another human being, whether it's a child, whether it's a stranger on the street, whether it's the cashier, who's at the grocery store, and starting from a place of understanding our shared humanity. One of my favorite teachers in the world of compassion is this gentleman named Thupten Jinpa. He was one of the English language translators for the Dalai Lama. And he wrote this beautiful book called A Fearless Heart. And part of what he was trying to do is create a secular curriculum for teaching compassion, so that it could be safely taught without anybody being too scared about too much spirituality. And one of the themes that he's continually discussing in that book is a practice he calls just like me. And when I think about Tibetan culture, I think about that practice. Right. Just like me, this person wants to be happy. I think about this when I think about the person I'm lucky enough to sponsor. Just like me, this person wants to be healthy. Just like me, this person wants to be safe. And then we move beyond just the foundational, am I safe? Into just like me, this person wants to be happy. This person wants to experience joy. Right. And to the extent that Tibetan culture is infused at its core, sort of in its DNA, with those values, I think people who support the organization and learn even just a little bit more, not just about the tragic history, right, but also about the enduring sort of calm optimism about how we can get through this. Yes. If we reach out and help one soul, if we reach out and mend that little tiny corner of the world that's within our reach, that's enough. In days when we're all feeling so intensely overwhelmed by the state of the world, it's a tonic. It's part of the answer. And so when big systems like the ones we're in seem so broken and impenetrable and unchangeable, and there's all this polarity, working with some of the values of Tibetan culture, we discover that we can actually influence small local systems. And if I can influence my small local system, and my neighbor can influence her small local system, and you can do it, suddenly something starts to happen. And no, I haven't fixed the whole world. I haven't done a lot, but I've done what I can. And you've done what you can. And that's how we move this thing forward. And for me, Tibetan culture embodies that. and has always embodied that. And some of my favorite images from Indian culture and Tibetan culture are wasn't it Tibetan Yogi Milarepa? There's always that picture of him where
You're
he's
right.
sitting and he's
Yep.
Milarepa. And I know this isn't supposed to be the meaning, but he's always, he's got his hand like this, right? He's like listening.
Yes.
I guess he's listening for a song, and his hand is in his lap. And I have a picture of that in my room where I do my practice. And I've always thought of that as somebody who is sort of listening for, what can I do next? What now? What's my next step? Who can I help? And it's just an extraordinary, rich, beautiful culture. And every single person I have met in your community has exuded just a level of kindness and acceptance that I don't find in a lot of the world.
And you're so kind. You've just been so generous with not only with your heart, but also with your word today on this Voices for program. I do want to follow up and sort of ask you, so let's say there's Anne Jablonski, there's another person with a really heart full of love, full of empathy for Tibet, Tibetan culture. How are some easy ways to actually show the support and the love to Tibet and the culture? How can people help?
Well, I mean, I would say even if I know this is a TCEF story, but for me, it became very easy to support what you guys are up to because I know you. Right. And there are elders who need help. There are children who need help. People who are, so inclined to get involved, in sort of activism in terms of, letter writing, talking to their elected representatives. Absolutely. About, there are small acts we can all take. I know I got more involved in local politics over the last few years, made a lot of phone calls down to places encouraging them to vote. But, just even to slice out a little time in each month and to say, I'm going to spend an hour and find out who I can help. And I really encourage folks to consider doing the TCEF sponsorship. It is such an enriching experience. And for me, I love it because I am 100% confident that little bit of money that I give goes directly to where it's needed. There is no doubt in my mind. So finding organizations that you can trust. I know when you were building that school was going to get built. When they needed a technology for the kids, you did a fundraiser to get the technology and it was in their hands. It didn't go into some big gaping maw where I hoped at some point somebody might benefit from it. It is, it's very satisfying for those of us who like instant gratification. Right. I know that these resources are going to be used well. In addition to sponsoring a child, which is its own kind of joy, I love Crystal's story about the child that she sponsored, yes, that she sort of saw grow up. I would also encourage folks to consider sponsoring an elder. Absolutely. For me, it was in many ways, and I'm going to embarrass you a little bit with this story, Karma. It's a way of honoring my own elders. My parents are gone now. Right. And can I tell the story about my dad's wallet? Absolutely, yes. Okay. People need to know this about Karma. In 2009, my father, who was in his 90s, passed away. I was by his side. My father was one of the gentlest, easiest, sweetest souls. I think maybe he was a Tibetan at heart. Right. He wasn't a Tibetan, he was Polish. And when he died, we were in the hospital and I was going home with my mom and she was gathering his things and she opened up his wallet and he had cash in it. And she took the cash and she says, he would want you to have this, take this cash. And I went home and I stuffed that money in my bag and I carried it around for months. And I thought, I can't spend this money. It was the last money my father ever carried. I was so close to him. And I think I carried it around for months and months and months. And I thought, I can't just buy a Starbucks with this. I don't want to buy groceries with it. And I thought about it for a little while. I actually sat on my altar and I wrote you a little letter and I said, I'm going to send you cash in the mail. I'm going to stick it in an envelope. Please put it to good use. And you wrote me the most beautiful letter about what you did with that money and about my father. And this is the reason TCEF will always have my support. You were there for me when I was going through the deep grief of losing an elder. And every time it's time to re-up the sponsorship for Grandma Tsering, I feel like it's a gift to my father. So thank you for that.
Oh, wow. And thank you. Thank you for this interview. And I really, really enjoyed talking to you. And the reason is easy to understand. You were so profuse and wonderful with your kindness, not only to me, but to Tibetan culture. I'm so grateful that you are a Tibet supporter and a voice for Tibet today. Thank you, Anne, so much. And then for people listening into this program, I wanted to say that there are many ways to help Tibet. I mean, I know that we do really good work with our sponsorship program, but one of the things that is on my heart is trying to find a bigger solution to the problem of Tibet. And that starts with having a dialogue between the Chinese leadership and perhaps His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So when people ask me, how can we support Tibet? What are some good ways of Tibet? One of the things that I wanted to really highlight on this program today is help in whatever way you can to bring about a dialogue. Because if you want to start solving the problem of Tibet, I believe it will start with a dialogue. So that's one good way to help Tibet and help all Tibetans. And then Anne was really very kind with the support for TCEF. And, you know I have wonderful people around the foundation who support our work. But I also wanted to say that for TCEF, the issue of Tibet is always larger. So if you're someone who has a, interest in politics and stuff like that, I wanted to encourage you to search for an organization called the International Campaign for Tibet. They're based pretty close to where Anne is right now in Washington, DC. They do fabulous work. Another organization that I sort of recommend for younger folks, folks with passion, but maybe not enough funds in their pocket right now, is an activist organization called Students for Free Tibet. So there are, some amazing Tibetan organizations. If you're listening onto this program, please know that aside from TCEF, there are many wonderful Tibetan organizations worthy of your support, worthy of your good heart. Thank you always, everyone, for your love and support to Tibet. And thank you, Anne, for being this wonderful voice for Tibet today.
Thank you for what you're doing in the world, Karma.